Welcome back to GMP Scenario, presented by PharmaContentLabs.com.
All right, let's dive right in. We're talking about something I'm sure many of you have seen, something that feels super efficient, but is actually a huge compliance trap in regulated industries. I'm talking about bundled change control. You know, when you see a whole bunch of different updates all crammed into one single request form.
So picture this. A single change request hits your desk. At first glance, it looks fine. But then you realize it's not one change. It's 4 distinct changes all rolled into one. And that's when you have to ask yourself, what could possibly go wrong here? Well, as it turns out, a lot. Here's a perfect example. This one form is asking for a process parameter to be updated, a part on a piece of equipment to be swapped out, a bunch of SOPs to be revised, and all of the training that goes along with it, all on one piece of paper. I mean, it seems convenient, right? One and done. But that so-called convenience is exactly where the trouble starts.
And this gets us to the heart of the matter. What looks like a smart shortcut is actually a massive hidden weakness, especially under good manufacturing practices, or GMP. When you're working in that world, bundling changes together isn't just a bad habit, it's a fundamental breakdown of your whole change control system.
So let's just be crystal clear on what we mean by a bundle change. It's simply grouping multiple separate changes into one request. And the biggest problem with this, it completely hides the risk of each individual piece. You can't see what's actually dangerous because it's all just lost in this big, jumbled package.
Look at this comparison. Over on the left, you've got the bundle. It's just a tangled mess, and the risks are all hidden in there somewhere. But on the right, you have the GMP way. This is how you're supposed to do it. Every single change has its own clearly defined scope and its own individual risk assessment. It's the difference between crossing your fingers and hoping for the best versus actually proving you're in control of your process.
Okay, so let's follow this chain of risk and see where it leads. Because we're not just talking about messy paperwork here. This practice creates real-world consequences that can seriously impact your operations, your products, and your standing with regulators. First off, it completely blurs accountability. I mean, think about it. If that big bundled change gets approved and something goes sideways later, who's responsible? Was it the new equipment part that failed? Was it the change to the process? Or was the training just not good enough? When everything is lumped together, it's pretty much impossible to figure out who owns what. And that, of course, makes any investigation an absolute nightmare. Let's say you have an issue pop up after you've implemented the change. Now your team has to try and untangle this knot to find the root cause. It's like trying to find one bad light on a huge string of Christmas lights. You're just wasting time and money, and it makes finding a real solution incredibly difficult. But honestly, this one might be the most dangerous of all. Bundling can completely mask the real regulatory impact of a change. You might have a tiny equipment part update that, on its own, would need to be reported to a regulatory agency. But if you bury it inside a big, minor change that's mostly just SOP updates, well, that critical reporting step can easily get missed. And that is a massive compliance gap waiting to be found. And believe me, inspectors live for this stuff. As the source material says, they will always challenge you on an unclear scope and rationale. The second an auditor sees a bundled change request, alarm bells start going off. For them, it's a huge red flag that signals a lack of control, and that is not a conversation you want to be having during an inspection. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the problem. Let's talk about the solution. The good news is there's a very clear, compliant, step-by-step way to handle this the right way. It's all about being deliberate and breaking things down.
The process is actually pretty logical. Step 1. Unbundle it. Break that big request down into its individual logical pieces. The rule should be one change, one request. Step 2. Run a separate risk assessment for each of those individual changes. And finally, Step 3. Sequence the implementation. Do it in a controlled way, making sure one piece is done and verified before you even start the next one.
And, of course, you have to document everything. For every single one of those unbundled changes, you need a full, complete paper trail. That means a defined scope, its own risk assessment, its own approvals, clear evidence that it was implemented correctly, and records of all your post-change checks. This is what gives you a crystal clear, totally defensible audit trail.
So why does this keep happening? Well, it almost always comes down to this one simple but deeply flawed idea. Let's just approve the bundle to save time. But as we've just seen, any time you think you're saving up front is paid back 10 times over in confusion, risk, and eventually some really tough regulatory findings.
So let's wrap this up with the one thing I really want you to remember. It's this simple phrase: clarity proves control. It's that simple. If every single change is clear, distinct, and assessed on its own, you are demonstrating that you have robust control over your process. If it's all bundled up and murky, can you honestly say you're in control? That's the real question to ask yourself the next time a bundled request lands on your desk.
Thank you for watching. If this helped, like and subscribe. More GMP scenarios coming.